Fuck HIPAA. My new patient is a serial killer, and I'm not all that bothered.
Disclaimer: the content presented in this video is purely fictional and intended for entertainment purposes only.
On March 8, 2006, police in an undisclosed city on the East Coast received a 911 call from a minor child who stated that his mother was murdering a man in their basement. The child stated, "Everything smells like blood, and I hear him screaming." Units were immediately dispatched, and arrived to find a human slaughterhouse. The basement was set up in such a way that it resembled a surgical suite, including 2 operating tables and hospital-grade cold storage in which detectives recovered 47 pounds of human skin and 14 organs including kidneys, lungs, livers, and hearts. The crime scene included copious amounts of needle and thread. Investigators eventually learned that the perpetrator was removing skin, organs, and other parts from some of her victims and sewing them onto, and occasionally into, other victims. To date, the recipients of these primitive transplants have not been discovered or even formally identified. The perpetrator was a former police officer who apparently experienced a psychotic break after the officer-involved shooting death of her sister. 2 victims, including the perpetrator's relative, were discovered in terrible shape but ultimately rescued. The incident report states that the relative in particular was horrific, and had patches of skin from 7 different victims grafted onto her. Interestingly, the relative was nevertheless mobile and alert. Disturbingly, this relative claimed to be the perpetrator's deceased sister. The perpetrator was taken into custody without incident, charged, found guilty, and sentenced without incident. She was a model prisoner and remained incarcerated for several years. She attended classes within the facility, and demonstrated enough trustworthiness that she was allowed to resume sewing and cross-stitch projects, which had previously been among her favorite hobbies. Approximately 8 years after her arrest, she had a visitor who, falsely, as it turned out, informed her that her son, Michael, had been remanded to a secure inpatient facility. This news left her distressed and inconsolable. So much so that according to official sources, she took her own life. Official reports are lacking in many respects and falsified in others due to agency involvement. The inmate's in-custody death was a cover for transferring her out of the prison and into the custody of the Agency of Helping Hands. Inmate Rosalyn F., who has been given the title Mrs. Stitcher due to her unique set of skills, has a very long history with the organization and long-standing personal involvement with Director Wingeride, with whom she shares a son, Ward 1, the Siren. Rosalyn was commissioned as a T-Class agent assigned to the agency's PN division, where she provided medical care to staff and inmates alike. Rosalyn is able to quickly heal any wound that includes, but is not limited to, broken or damaged skin by patching the wound with another material. The best, longest-lasting results occur when she uses pieces of her own skin as patches. The next best results occur when the patches are made of human flesh. Acceptable results can occur when she uses patches made of other materials, including but not limited to textiles. It should be noted that Rosalyn has not been cooperative since October 2023. For this reason, her T-Class status is currently suspended. Rosalyn is a 44-year-old woman approximately 5 feet 8 inches tall, with black hair and brown eyes. She is physically healthy. Her physical fitness level in particular is exemplary. She is intelligent, confident, and consistently provided excellent care to her patients. Her diagnoses include post-traumatic stress disorder and anxiety, both of which have been well managed for the duration of her incarceration. While Rosalyn is no longer cooperative with agency directives, she is highly cooperative with her treatment plans. Interview subject, Mrs. Stitcher, classification string. Uncooperative/destructible/casualty/constant/low, Danos, interviewer, Rochelle B. Interview date, December 27, 2024, I've been a team player my whole life. I'm always on somebody's team, but no one is ever on mine. This pattern started with my sister, Maya. I was the oldest kid. Maya was the baby. I adored her more than life itself and hated her almost as much because Mom gave her everything I never had. Maya never knew about the hate though. I made sure, for all intents and purposes, I was her mother. Our mom loved her and, like I said, gave Maya everything she never gave me, but my mom was never in a good place. which means she wasn't actually capable of giving much. Of course I didn't see it that way. When no one ever feeds you, crumbs start looking like a feast. The crumbs Mom gave Maya looked like a feast to me. Still, I recognized that Mom wasn't giving Maya what she needed. So I bridged that gap by stretching myself the way an upholsterer stretches fresh linen over a ruined chair. I would definitely describe my family as ruined. Loving, very loving, but ruined. Their instability turned me into a control freak early on. It turned my sister into the opposite of a control freak almost as early. This was bad because Maya could talk me into anything. I loved her too much to ever tell her no. My childhood was an endless struggle to seek order in chaos. I never found it. I've been beholden to chaos my entire life. Our family was my first round with chaos. Maya was my second. It frustrated me and it scared me, too. I was a good role model. I got the best grades, I never missed school, and I got along with everyone, even the people who went out of their way to not get along with me. I wanted the same for Maya because I wanted the best for her. Like I said, I was on her team, she just wasn't on mine, and there was nothing I could do about it. It wasn't her fault. I mean, I was raising her. Anything that went wrong with her was on me, anyway. Like I told you, I was, is, and forever will be a control freak. Control freaks like security. We like to know the future. When I was 18, I decided the closest I would get to either was the military. Maya cried when I left. Shrieked until she threw up. She clung on me and wouldn't let go. She left bruises. The taxi almost left without me because it took so long to calm her down. I had nightmares about her for weeks. Kept snapping awake to images of Maya bleeding or choking to death or running out into the road or cracking her head open in the shower. Anyway, I made it through basic training, AIT, and all the rest. I trained as a medic and passed with flying colors. Throughout it all, and against the evidence of my eyes and ears, I let everyone convince me that the military was one big team. I like being on a team. I always work hard to be the best teammate I can, but my whole life, it felt like I was on everyone else's team without anyone being on mine. I told you that. I was convinced the military would change that. That I'd finally be working with people who had my back as much as they had mine. It didn't happen, but I convinced myself that it eventually would. That everything would eventually fall into place. Everything just kind of fell apart instead. I figured out pretty quick that I'd made a mistake, but the thing about the military is once you're in, and I was in. Long story short, I eventually ended up in Bosnia. My primary duty station was the field hospital in Zagreb, but I spent a lot of time in the field helping to clear mines. After a couple of weeks, one of those mines exploded on us. Grass and rocks and clods of dirt rained down. A stone cut my cheek. The dust tore over us like a storm on fast forward. It was so bad my asthma kicked in for the first time in years. As it dust settled, something stirred in the rubble. Something impossible. Something that made my ears ring and my eyes keep trying to slide off to the side so I wouldn't have to look at it. But you can't not look at a threat, not when situational awareness is the only thing keeping you alive. The thing slithered toward me, so I shot it. It dodged, diving like a mermaid into the crater, and my bullet hit someone behind it right as another mine exploded. I didn't think. I rushed through the dust fog for my victim. He wasn't a soldier. He was American, though. He was also very handsome, and he had a gun, and not just any gun. I know guns. I'm ex-military. I'm a former cop. Shit. I'm a gun nut. But the gun this man had was something I had never seen. It was insane. Like a movie prop, or something out of Looney Tunes, but I didn't have time to worry about the gun. I was consumed with keeping him alive. In addition to the bullet holes I'd put in his leg, the second mine had taken a big, ugly bite out of his abdomen. I could see his bottom ribs glistening, and he was bleeding out. That's when I finally noticed I was hurt, too, and bad. My shoulder was burned to hell, and this big-ass sheet of skin was hanging off my obviously broken arm. so while I'm kneeling there trying to keep this fucker alive with one hand, two things happen: that sheet of arm skin flops down across his wound. And the impossible creature that broke my brain came scrabbling out of the smoking earth. It was this pale, sunken thing. Human-like but inhuman and somehow tortured, something made of ashes and broken, weather-bleached bones. It had the saddest eyes. Sad black eyes as broken as its bones. It slid its hand around my wrist and squeezed gently. Its fingers crept up along my skin like the legs of a giant spider, and snapped one of its fingers off in my palm, then it let go and sank back into the ground, leaving a handprint of ashes on my wrist. I tried to go after it, but something was pulling me back. Literally pinning me in place. For a second I thought I saw the glitter, maybe, of tired black eyes. But then they were gone and reality came roaring back in. My arm was overwhelming agony. And the man I'd been trying to save was shrieking in my ear. I looked back. No wonder he was screaming. The skin hanging off my ruined arm was stuck to his ruined chest. That's what was pinning me in place. My skin had fused to his wound. We were attached. Conjoined. Don't ask me how I knew what to do. I could not tell you. But I took that big bony finger and used it to cut myself free. The piece of my skin melted into him. The loose flap that was still stuck to me just swung from exposed bone like a wet bedsheet. Without letting myself think too hard, I helped him up and we stumbled around until we found help. It was a struggle keeping the guy conscious. He barely made it. When we got to the field hospital, they airlifted him out. Shortly after that, the doctor determined that my arm was irreparably fucked up. 2 ribs were broken, and 1 eardrum had ruptured. I got an honorable discharge. I went home. Everything was a mess. My sister was wilder than ever, like she was punishing me for leaving in the first place. I couldn't even work on my cross-stitch anymore. I love cross-stitching. It's the only thing that calms me down, because she destroyed them all and threw all my supplies in the garbage. My mom and her family treated me like they didn't know me and didn't want to. I felt like I didn't fit in anymore. Or maybe I just finally figured out that I'd never fit in at all. That changed when my brother broke his arm. It was a compound fracture, the kind where the bone sticks out through the skin. He was always hurting himself back then, the way only teenage boys can. My mom hadn't paid the phone bill, so we couldn't call an ambulance. We wouldn't have been able to afford one if we could. Everyone was panicking. They were telling me to help him. I had training. I was a medic. I needed to do something. Meanwhile, no one was looking at my brother, who was turning gray. That was okay, because I knew what to do. I was scared because I didn't have the bone blade anymore. I'd thrown that shit away before I left the hospital. I grabbed a kitchen knife instead. Sliced a chunk of my skin off, and put it on my brother's injury. It stopped bleeding, but the bone was still sticking out and he was still screaming. So I did something insane. I grabbed my sewing kit and started stitching that patch of my sin onto my brother's body. With each stitch, the bone sank back into his body a little more. Every time it moved, he screamed. I don't blame him. Healing hurts even when it's slow. Fast healing is a very particular agony, but then it was done. He flexed his arm carefully, then looked at me. I'll never forget that look, and I don't think he'll ever forget the look I gave him in return. Out in the hallway, my mom was still freaking out. What do I tell them? He asked. I shrugged. I don't know. The truth. Just like that, I fit in with my family again. My extended family was big. Between all the siblings and cousins, there were probably 30 kids in my family, all of whom started coming to me any time they got hurt. They got hurt a lot. Most of it was minor enough that I didn't have to skin myself to help them, which was a relief. I just had to stitch their skin together. As long as the wounds were small, stitching worked just as well as patching. I also had a few grandparents and great-aunts whose bodies were breaking down in real time. That happens when you get old. Your skin just stops doing skin things. I couldn't stitch them up into an instant heal like I could with the kids. I found out that patching them up with fabric sometimes worked, especially if the fabric came from their old clothes. Old people don't like it when you cut up their clothes, thought. And besides, the fabric looked weird and didn't last all that long. The only thing that truly healed the grandparents was pieces of my own skin, so I did it. It was brutal, but sores hurt. I didn't want my grandma hurt. Anyway, my arm, the one that got hurt and started all this, had enough nerve damage that I couldn't even feel it when I peeled skin off from there, so that's what I did for my grandparents. I patched them up with myself. Sometimes my skin grafted automatically, but mostly I had to stitch it on. I know how insane it sounds, but that's how it happened. How I reintegrated into my family. How I finally got them all on my team. For the first time, they all loved me. They didn't even complain when I applied for the police department, and even my mother was proud when I was accepted into the academy. Everyone but my uncle showed up to my badge ceremony, and all it cost me was my own flesh. Like I told you, when no one ever feeds you, even crumbs look like a feast, and you know what? I was still happy, right up until that uncle started bringing his friends to me for help, and his friends didn't need my help for scrapes, broken bones, cuts, little burns, or dog bites. They needed my help with stab wounds. Gunshots, and worse. That's because my uncle and his friends were deep in all the shit I hate. Drugs, weapons, prostitution, labor trafficking. We fought. I told him I couldn't do this. I was a cop. Not only would I lose my job, I'd end up in jail, and he of all people knew what happened to ex-cops in jail, but for all my fighting, it was a done deal. Gangs are like the military, once you're in, you're in. And my uncle dragged me right on in without a warning. The one good thing about it was the money. But even that amounted to just about nothing because I couldn't do any fucking thing with that money. You try depositing tens of thousands of dollars in cash into Bank of America twice a month. See how long it takes authorities to come knocking at your door, so the money stayed inside the house, stashed in a lockbox. I knew about it, Mom and Maya knew in case of emergencies, and of course my fucking uncle knew because he arranged the payments. Would you be surprised if I told you he robbed me? Took every last bit of that money and ran. Would you be surprised if I told you my mom ordered me to let it go? I was surprised. We were family. Family's supposed to be on the same team. I was on their team, but yet again, no one was on mine, and I was crushed. It was the lowest point of my life, unless you count the way Maya cried when I left, and I don't know if it was a coincidence or not. But the day I hit that low point, the day I knew that no one, not even my family, would ever be on my side the way I was on theirs, is the day this big clunky truck parked in front of my house. I thought it was more of my uncle's friends, come either for help or to extort me for something he owed them. I went outside before they could come in. A man got out as I approached. When I saw him, I breathed a little easier. Not because I knew who he was, I didn't, not yet, but because I knew this white man in a uniform was as different from my uncle as someone could be. We met halfway across the yard. Up close, he was familiar, but I couldn't place him. He gave me a smile, and it was a knockout smile. My God, and said my name. That's when I recognized him. This was the man I shot in Bosnia. The one with the crazy cartoon gun. My name is Eric, he said. I know you don't know me, but I've been looking for you. I want to thank you for saving my life. I didn't save you. Pretty sure I shot you. But I shook his hand anyway. Then he asked if I'd let him buy me dinner. I knew better, even then. Even before I knew anything else, I knew better, but I was in a low spot, and he was gorgeous. Even if he was way too old, we both got in his truck. There was a driver. He was a big guy, a monster, really, wearing a purple jumpsuit that brought out the bags under his eyes. Eric told me his name was Wolf. I assumed Wolf was his bodyguard, which meant Eric here was rich. Dinner was nice. Eric was nicer. Wolf wasn't all that nice, kept coughing and excusing himself, but he was otherwise polite. Afterward, Eric gave me money for saving his life. The amount is a little more than I'm worth, strictly speaking, but you deserve it, and dropped me off. I thought that was the end of it, but it was just the beginning. 2 months later, Eric came back with his truck. Instead of his asthmatic bodyguard, he brought a woman. She was in horrific shape. Scalp half torn off, puncture wounds all over, beaten and broken. Just completely brutalized. He told me she was his sister. She wasn't, but I didn't know that. When Eric asked me to help her just like I'd helped him, I didn't hesitate. I stitched her scalp back on. It was hard. She had a lot of hair and the weight kept making the skin slide off her skull until Eric held it in place. The puncture wounds were harder. Puncture wounds are nasty. I didn't want to fuck with those, so I cut some of my own skin off my arm. The nerves don't work right since the mine accident, so it didn't really hurt, and used it to patch those up. Then I stitched up everything that could be stitched and did my best to set her broken bones. I couldn't fix her bones, or do anything about the bruises. I can't actually do anything unless the skin is broken or damaged, but I did everything I could. When I was done, Eric whisked her away without so much as a goodbye, but he came back a few days later and took me out to dinner again. Told me I was already one of the best friends he'd ever had, and he was grateful to know me. I believed him about that, but I had my doubts about everything else. He wouldn't answer my questions about the woman or what happened to her. When I asked if he was in a gang or the mob or a cartel, he promised me he wasn't. He said he wasn't allowed to tell me who he worked for, but that nothing about it was illegal. Quite the contrary, he said. In fact, I'm law enforcement, just like you. Over the next couple of months, Eric brought 3 other people. 2 were women. In roughly the same shape as the first woman. The last one that I didn't know what that was. I only know it wasn't human. Obviously, Eric was using me. Bringing me people just like my uncle did, only I didn't mind when Eric did it. I didn't even mind that all these people had crazy injuries. I mean crazy. The girl with no scalp was the least upsetting. Can you believe that? I know why all those injuries were crazy now, but back then I couldn't begin to fathom what had caused them. The 5th person he brought me was his bodyguard. Wolf was delirious and absolutely drenched in sweat. His chest was covered in holes, like bugs had been boring into him. When I leaned in to look, he gagged. Hot needles and burning fabric. Eric, he panted. I know she is your heart, but I can't breathe. Eric actually skinned himself to patch Wolf up. That impressed me in a way nothing else has. It was obvious even to me that Wolf was inferior, or at least hanging from a lower rung on whatever ladder he and Eric were climbing, but Eric still didn't hesitate to give of himself to save his friend. He always referred to me as his friend, too. It made me feel like I was safe with him. Like he'd have my back. Like we were on the same team. We got Wolf patched up and loaded back into the truck, and that was that. Eric came to see me again a few weeks later. I got ready to do whatever needed to be done. But this time he didn't have any work for me. He just wanted to take me out on a date. It was the first, but far, far from the last. I feel like such a moron now, but I didn't then. It wasn't just that Eric was beautiful. He was like an old school movie star, but somehow a little bit rougher and a little bit prettier at the same time. But that's not what mattered. What really mattered was who he was. He modeled everything I valued. He was intelligent and articulate and calm. He was hardworking and protective and deeply loyal. He took care of his people and didn't put his well-being above theirs. That's how I lived my life. Everything I did for everyone else. When I was with Eric, I felt like I finally had someone who valued me the way I valued damn near everybody else, and I liked the mystery. The mystery of him, the clandestine nature of it all. It felt like something out of a book. A real adventure. I was convinced he was a secret agent or a spy. What else was I supposed to think? A secret agent who fell in love with me based on who I was and what I could do. Real love. The kind of love that lasts. God, I was so stupid. A few days before the new year, I learned I was pregnant. I didn't have any way to contact him, so I held on to the news and waited for him to come by for another date, but the next time I saw him, he didn't come for a date, he'd only come to bring me work. And this was someone he didn't want me to help. It was a man. Just a regular-looking man I wouldn't have looked at twice if he hadn't been with Eric. Eric told me all these terrible things. What this person had done and what he was still going to do, especially to women. Said if he didn't die, he was going to do it again, so he asked me to kill him. The man was blubbering the whole time. It wasn't me, he kept saying. I didn't do any of that. It's not me. It's the other one, and they let him do it. I would never. I'd never. I'm not going to kill him, Eric, I said. I don't care what he did or didn't do. I'm not killing a man, especially not in my own fucking basement. Eric didn't answer. He pulled out a knife as weird and big as the gun he'd had in Bosnia. I stepped in front of the blubbering man, trying to shield him. There was no point. Eric didn't come for me, he came for himself. Gutted himself from ribs to hips. The wound was way too much for me to handle by flaying myself, and Eric was bleeding out fast. I knew there was only one way to save him, so I killed the other guy as quickly and kindly as I could, flayed him, and used the skin to patch Eric up. It was sick. It was murder, but I was in love, and Eric was the only person who seemed to value me the way I valued them. He treated me like I was important and smart and worthy. Like an equal. He'd opened the doors to a world I'd only ever imagined. Most importantly, he cared about me the way I cared about other people. That wasn't true. None of that was true. But I didn't know then. I couldn't know, because when you've been starved your whole life, even crumbs look like a feast. I worked fast, but Eric had done so much damage he almost died anyway. I held him all night while he recovered. In the morning, when some of the brightness was back in his eyes, I told him I was pregnant. Would you be surprised if I told you everything changed instantly? He threw me off and started to freak out. He told me we were done. That I couldn't even talk to him anymore. That I could never, ever reach out to him under any circumstances. It was so devastating that it wouldn't sink in. Nothing about it felt real. I just felt numb. Why? Are you fucking stupid? Hearing him, of all people, speak to me that way crushed me. He must have noticed, because he came back to the bed. I'm sorry. But don't you have any idea what they'll do to you? No, because you've never told me who they are. They are an organization that imprisons people like you. I could try to describe the horror I felt in that moment. The heartbreak, the anger, the betrayal, but I don't have all night, and neither do you. They're your organization. You're one of them. That's why you're here. Right? To catch me? Was that why he had me kill that man last night? To entrap me somehow? I was evaluating you. To determine whether you were safe enough to remain out here, or if you were sufficiently dangerous to warrant. I cut him off for the bureaucratic bullshit. Speak alone. Did you do all of this just to arrest me? It took him a while because he was angry. I'd never seen him angry. Never seen how incoherent he got when he was mad. Over the next few minutes, he explained he hadn't done any of it to arrest me. He said our meeting was accidental. That he'd been after a target in Bosnia when the mine quite literally threw us together. I thought of the bone-ash creature and shuddered. I saw it touch you, he told me. And after what happened right after it was obvious it had done something to you. It's not unheard of for encounters like that to taint victims, so we targeted you for further investigation. Who is we? Me, he said, and Wolf. Is that all I am to you? I asked. A target? No. He was still deathly pale. At first it was, but I didn't know you. The minute I got to know you, everything changed. I love you. I've been lying to them. Telling them you're not suitable for incarceration. That you don't have any abilities that make you dangerous. But they know. Wolf, he won't tell anyone. What about the others? 2 are at my organization as we speak. He said. The others are dead. Wolf killed them. I already told you, he won't tell anyone. But your sister, she wasn't my sister. I didn't even know her. Staring at him in the morning light, hearing what he was saying and understanding more than I ever wanted to, my heartbreak reversed. They can't know about you. They can't know how talented you are. They can't know about us. Not until I can control them. And I will one day. When that happens, I'll come back for you. I helped him wrap the dead man's body and load it into his truck. If they don't know about me, then why did you make me do this? I pointed to the wrapped body. I had to make sure, he said. Of what? I'll tell you someday. I promise. Then he kissed me. The feel of his mouth on mine was disgusting. I was about to shove him off when he spared me the trouble. He pulled me into a hug and whispered, I'm sorry, but I need you to get rid of the baby. Then he kissed me again, and left. As I watched him drive away, I didn't cry. I didn't even get sad, I was just mad as hell, and I didn't get rid of that baby. That baby is the most precious thing in my life, and I hate that he's here. I would burn everything down if I could just to set him free. That anger healed me. I didn't forget Eric, how could I? But I was able to shove him and all those memories in the same mental basement where all my bad memories go. In the end, he didn't matter any more to me than the bullies at school or the shit I got in the military. I think it means I was never in love with him. Well, that's not true. The person I fell in love with wasn't real, and I grasped that immediately. Eric wasn't real. I, however, was real. I'd been real from beginning to end. I wasn't ashamed of that. I still felt stupid. I still feel stupid. But I never felt ashamed, any more than I felt ashamed for being my best for everyone else. That's too bad, though, because that kind of thinking is, and will always be a mistake. It's a mistake I first made when I was a kid with my mom and Maya. It was a mistake I made in the military. It was a mistake I made it again when I got home, when everyone in my family treated me like an outsider until they figured out they could use me. It's a mistake I made as a cop, feeling camaraderie for a whole bunch of people who didn't feel it for me. It's a mistake I made with Eric. Again and again and again, I play for a team that never plays for me. I even made it again with my sister. When my coworker shot her, I knew the guy who shot her. Did you know that? He was my partner's best friend. He knew me, he knew Maya, he knew we weren't dangerous, and he still killed her. I brought her back the only way I knew how, by skinning someone alive and using his flesh and my needlework to bring her back when I went to see her at the morgue. I loved her so much. I still do. It didn't go wrong, exact. TLY. But she'd been dead a few days, and it showed. She needed a lot of ongoing work. A lot of repairs, but after I brought her back, she was still herself, mostly. And both better and worse, and she could still talk me into anything. In fact, she was better at that than ever. She convinced me I was magic. Better than magic. That I was a god. I started a little Robin Hood health clinic in my basement because of her. Selling my services to people who needed them for what they could afford. Homeless kid down the street. He could afford to give me a pretty rock he found by the river, and maybe a dime. Rich-ass mobster who needed help. 25,000, you bastard. I couldn't have done it without Maya. She brought me my victims, people who had hurt others and would continue to do so I had a constant supply of materials to help my patients. Some of my patients were brought to me already dead, just like Maya. They came back better and worse than before, just like Maya. There were more and more of them as the weeks wore on. And they had a smell. Like blood. A lake of blood. No matter how hard I scrubbed or bleached that basement, my whole entire house reeked of blood. That smell is what tipped my baby boy off, why he found me, why he did what he did. I don't blame him. He did right. I've told him that every chance I get. I was wrong to do what I did. So was his auntie. He doesn't believe me, though. I know he doesn't. After I went to prison, I was sure I'd learn from my mistakes. That I'd never make them again, until Eric came back. He brought me an offer. He told me he was in charge of his organization now and he'd come back for me just like he promised. I could either stay in prison until I died, or I could go with him. He promised things would be different. That I wouldn't be locked up. That he and I would truly be a team. He also told me he had our son, and that was that. We staged my death and he got me out in less than a week. He didn't pick me up. He sent Wolf to do it. When I got here, Eric didn't even pretend. He shut me in my cell himself and told me I had two choices. I could decide to work and stay in the big cell. Or I could decide not to work and go down to where they kept the monsters. He didn't show me my son. He said Mikey wasn't ready to see me. That he hated me for ruining his life. Then he told me everything that happened to Mikey since I went to prison. He said it was all my fault, but don't worry, he said. I'm fixing him. Once he's fixed, maybe he'll want to see you again. I didn't believe Mikey would ever want to see me again. See, when Mikey found out what I was a murderer, I told him I only did it to bad people. But he thought that meant I was going to do it to him. Because the way I spoke to him, the way I treated him, made him think he was bad. So yeah, I failed him. Not on purpose, but who fails their kid on purpose? Except Eric. Over time, I convinced myself that Mikey wasn't really here. I decided it was one of Eric's lies. And I was glad it was a lie. The idea of my boy being here, working for these people, or worse, being in a cell, would have destroyed me, and when they finally brought him to see me last year, it did destroy me. That's when I stopped working for you once and for all. It messed things up a little. I'm not sorry. Not a bit. When I quit, they were having me work with the little girl. Senna. Oh my God, what they do to her. What they do to me. What they do to him. Yeah, him. We've met down there a couple times, haven't we? Wolf. Fuck me. Fuck you. Just fuck, and what have they done to you, Red? What's this on your hand? Did they do that? Can I see? Oh, calm the fuck down, Wolf. When I have ever hurt anyone here? And what makes you think I'd start with her? I'd start with Eric, then I'd come for you. Put you down and out of your misery, just like you always beg me to. So, Red, have they done anything to you yet, other than trapping you with their pet lady killer? No. Well, good. Good. Maybe you'll keep being lucky. I hope you will, but I know you won't. Mikey told me about you. You're like me. You trust the people you work with, more or less. You always have. You like the idea of a shared goal. You like being on their team. And you know what? They like having you on theirs, but you need to learn from my mistakes and understand that none of them, including Wolf here, are on yours, not a single one.